Alright, what's going on today, YouTube? Welcome back to your favorite cyclist YouTube channel. This week, we're putting a new chainring on the Superfly. But before we get into today's video, if you are new to my channel, make sure you head down below, hit that subscribe button for me. If you already are subscribed, make sure you hit the little bell icon right next to that. That way you get notified every time I upload. That way you don't miss any of these awesome cycling content on this channel. So right on to the video, we're swapping chain rings on the Superfly. We're gonna get right into this. We'll pull that old chainring off and we'll talk more about what we're swapping and why exactly we're swapping it. So tools you're gonna need. In my case, I have just your standard hollow bottom bracket. So in my case, a 5mm and maybe a flathead screwdriver to get the chainring bolts off. Pretty easy. If you have a square taper bottom bracket, you're gonna need a crank arm puller. Not necessary for me, but you are gonna need one of those if you do have a square taper bottom bracket. I've got a link right up there if you don't know what you're talking, if you don't know what a square taper bottom bracket is. So let's get right over to the bike and start taking this old chainring off. So for my bike, very easy to get this crank arm off. So pretty much there's a 5mm bolt there and a 5mm bolt here, and then of course you have your end cap on your crank arm right here. So before you even get those 5mm bolts, we're gonna go ahead and get this end cap off. They did make tools specifically for this. I've always been pretty good with the pair of needleless pliers. You can get it in between two of those teeth there on the inside and just pull apart and twist it until it's loose enough. You can just grab it with your fingers and pull it off the rest of the way. Again, this is just like plastic, so it's not super hard to get off. Be careful with it. So once you get that off, go ahead and grab your 5mm, and we're just gonna go ahead and loosen these two bolts here. Again, don't take them all the way out, just need to loosen them so they loosen their grip some on the crank arm. Here we go, there's one, there we go. All right, once your bolts are loosened up, the crank arm should just pull right off like so. One crank arm done. And on the other side, with our drive side, all you're gonna have to do, go ahead, release your clutch if you need to on the back, pull your chain off, go ahead and set that on the bottom bracket, and we just go ahead and pull her right off, and we'll get right over the workbench and we will get this chainring off of here. Alright, so now I've got the crank set off. Pretty easy to go ahead and get the chainring off. As you'll notice, there are 4 bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are what's holding your chainring onto the crank set. So, like I said, good old 5mm Allen key. Go ahead and put that in there, and just go ahead and loosen it up. And like I said, sometimes you're going to need a flathead screwdriver, something on the back side, in order to hold this back keeper. If it is too tight or something along those lines, you might need something to hold this keeper on the back. In my case, I just did these, so they should come right off, no problem at all. There we go, there's one. And one thing you want to do when you take these apart, make sure you don't lose both halves. So I like to just screw them together. That way they at least stay together. You're not losing half of a chainring bolt. Make sure you don't lose it, makes your life a little easier versus them to try and find one. So go ahead and do our next one there. Yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna loosen them all. Oh, just crack them all loose. There we go. All right, so those are all cracked loose, and after that, we just go ahead, we'll just thread them out the rest of the way till they are completely off. There we go, tighten those together. Go ahead and get our next one. And if you have like a road bike or something a little bit different than this, sometimes we'll have a 5-bolt setup versus a 4, but it's gonna be the same process either way to get those chain rings on and off, just one more bolt. Screw that one on, and we'll go ahead and get our last guy right here. Try not to let them roll off the edge of the table. There we go. All right, and when you go ahead and undo this last one, you'll notice everything just kind of falls apart like that. That is perfect. That's what you want to happen. We got our chainring off. Let's talk about what we're changing this to and why exactly we're changing our chainring. So now we have the old chainring off, we can talk about our new chainring and why we're switching exactly. So old chainring, this is a 32-tooth chainring. This is the one I've been running ever since I switched my bike to a single speed off of the 3x10 drivetrain. So I have been running this for about 4 years. So this has been pretty good chainring. So one thing I have noticed in the past like 6 months riding my 1x9 setup is that I really only sit in probably the top half of the cassette, which means top 4 gears in my cassette, largest 4. I never really get to the bottom 5 gears. I'm always in those top 4 gears, and that's where I ride most comfortably. So with this 32-tooth chainring, that might be a little too big. And that's about the most comfortable I can get, is about 4 gears down, maybe 5, unless I'm ripping downhill or on the street, which it's a mountain bike. You're on mountain street trails all the time. So that is that. The other thing I noticed is that I want a little bit lower gear when I'm climbing. I always try and go for one more gear. I try to push level one more time, even though I'm at the top of my range. So what we're switching over to, this is a 30-tooth chainring. So we're going down 2 teeth count versus our old one there. It's just a little bit bigger than our new one here. So this one here, what's the deal? What are we running here? So this is a Buckloss. Buckloss? I don't know. This is some cheapo chainring that I bought on eBay. So it's not a great chainring. It's a 32 chainring, However, I've had decent luck with cheap chainrings. The one I'm replacing, not a cheap chainring. This is a nice race face chainring. What's funny is I bought this 4 years ago in 2018. This is about 35 bucks. I looked when I was looking to replace it and go for a 30 tooth. They are now about 60 bucks. So I'm not spending 60 bucks on a chainring when I don't know if it's really gonna be the right chainring size for me. So El Cheapo chainring, about 20 bucks. Nice, easy way to tell if this chainring is gonna work for me. If it works and it ends up breaking or busting or something along those lines, you can always upgrade to something more expensive later. I'm only at 20 bucks. If it doesn't work, cool, whatever, I can switch something else. So it doesn't matter too much of a deal for me. That's pretty much the deal with that. This is just an aluminum chainring, nothing fancy, 30 tooth. I'll have a link to both of these in the description so you can take a look at them if you want. So let's go ahead. We're gonna go ahead and get this new chainring, this new 30 tooth chainring installed. This is that fancy oil slick one that all the kids like to ride nowadays. I don't know, thought it was an interesting one. With the bash guard I run on my crankset, I don't really notice it anyways. You can barely see it through this anyway. So it doesn't matter to me, it's more fun than a black one. And I thought it'd be a cool little change for the bike. So let's get right onto the crankset. We'll get this new chainring installed. So the first thing we're gonna do, like you always should do before you reassemble something, go ahead, just clean up any dirt that got in between your chainring and your crankset. Make sure it's nice and clean so everything sits nice and flush on there. So with this setup, I believe we're gonna put our lettering forward. Looks kind of cool. All right, so we're just gonna go ahead and put that right there. And then we'll slide our bash guard on the front. So now we got everything all lined up. Like I said, this 30 tooth is a little bit different. So we don't use these backing nuts off our chainring bolts. We just use the front, it looks like. So let's go ahead, we'll just try and thread this in there. That seems to work. Okay, so we'll pull these backing nuts off of the other ones. I would save those backing nuts if you can. You're gonna need them if you switch back to any other crankset or any other chainring besides for a 30 tooth. So make sure you hang on to them. They're gonna go in my toolbox. That way I have them. Gonna tighten that one up. And I'm just putting these in just to hold the chainring in, and then once we're done, we're gonna go ahead and crisscross pattern. Just make sure everything is tightened evenly. Nothing's getting warped or anything along those lines. Looks like they get about half of the available threads covered. So cool. So from there, we're just gonna go ahead. We're gonna get Allen key, and we're just gonna tighten and pretty much a kind of a crisscross pattern. So we'll do up here, down here, and then we'll go across and across, just to make sure everything is pretty evenly tightened across there. That way, hopefully nothing gets bent in our process here. I've had other people comment in previous videos, you need to torque your chainring bolts. I have never once torqued a chainring bolt. I mean, if you have a carbon crankset or something, sure, whatever, you can crank, that's probably a better thing to do. Most of us, we're not using carbon cranksets. We're using just your standard old aluminum cranksets, aluminum chainring, bash guard. Our biggest concern is this thing ain't coming off. So I normally just go as hard as, as tight as I can get with one hand. I'm gonna use my off hand here, just to make sure we're getting as tight as we can. All right, cool. So there is that all installed. Ooh, look at that. That is shiny. All right, it ain't gonna be shiny for very long, but that's shiny right now. Cool, so we got that installed, so let's go ahead, we'll slip this back onto the bike and we will see how it looks on there. So installation of our crankset, exact opposite. We're just gonna go ahead, make sure you have your chain, of course. Got our chain on bottom bracket. I'm just gonna slide that guy through there. Make sure it doesn't get in between, that'd be bad. There we go. Slide her all the way through. Go ahead, pull our chain back onto the chain ring. Then the other side, you might be like, how do you line this up though? If that side's like this, how does line this side up? So it's actually pretty easy. If you look right on top of those threads, there's actually a hole right there. That hole you're gonna go ahead and line up with where the bolts cross, from which your other end of the crankset, and that's going to make it directly opposite of the other one. So we'll go ahead, pop that guy on there. There we are, lined up. And we'll go ahead and give it a couple taps there. There we are. And before we tighten those bolts up, we're gonna go ahead and put our little guy right there. We're gonna go ahead and put him back in here. And you can use my patented trick here with my N Hills pliers to get that nice and tight. And essentially what this is doing is trying to pulling this crank arm into the rest of the crankset. So again, it doesn't have to be super tight. It's just there to make sure that everything is pulled together like it should be. All right, that should be good. And then on here, with your two bolts, there's a note that says each bolt needs to be tightened evenly. Yep, and equally tightened to 12 to 14 Newton meters. So, I don't think I've ever torqued it, but I at least make sure they're tightened evenly. So make sure you don't just yeet on one of them and leave the other one high and dry. Same as you would for like your stem bolts or your handlebar bolts. you know, any of those bolts. So we're gonna make sure we kind of do like one turn, and we'll just keep going back and forth till they're tight. There we have it, other crank arm, nice and installed, ready to go. So as now you go ahead and get a new chainring installed on your bike. Same thing applies for pretty much any kind of bike out there. Some bikes have a little bit different retaining, but if you have a 4 or 5 bolt chainring, just say you get that installed on the bike and get out with a new chainring on there. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a big thumbs up. Appreciate the support. Any comments or questions, let me know down in the comment section below. Love chatting with you guys. Love answering any questions you guys have. And we'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching today.